Greetings, folks. This is Scott, and you're tuning into A Woman's Place, the podcast where we break down all the policies and politics that affect the 51%. That's right, women are half the US population, and Ashley and I are here to give you the facts about how today's events are affecting them. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Good morning, Ashley Brown.
Hello, Scott Osborne. How are you?
It's a delight to see you.
Good to see you. And putting context on and when we are, it is cold in Florida today.
It is cold. It's January in Florida.
I know, we're having winter.
We need it though. It keeps us ready for summer. And they're black for the audience. Our black was not planned. It just seemed to evolve today.
I know it is. So I'm excited about this topic today for a couple of reasons.
I am very excited.
What are
I'm
we talking
actually
about?
excited for two reasons. One, I find this topic fascinating, and two, this topic relates to our Through Women's Eyes Film Festival, which is coming up in March, because Dr. Zoe Ross-Nash, who we'll have on with us today talking about eating disorders, is one of the subjects of a film that we will have March the 7th at our Through Women's Eyes Film Festival. So we can talk more about that later, but that's really cool for us.
We will, and we'll put a link in to the festival because I think it's really important to sharing that opportunity, and it's certainly a topic and just everything that you all are trying to do with that festival is part of the conversations we're having every time we're on the podcast. So there you go.
Diverse media it is, yes.
Absolutely.
So I hope people enjoyed the last talk where we were with Felicia Lanner, the chair of the board, is that correct, of Ruthless Florida. Do you want to say just one thing about what Ruthless is, and then we'll get right to Zoe?
Sure. Do you want me to say what?
Yes, I do want you to say.
So Ruthless is Florida-based and is focused on getting, I think, pro-choice democratic women, mainly women, but also endorses men, because it doesn't always have to be female to be a female family supporting political leadership that is focused on policies that do that. So, but really focused on policies and getting people elected that want to make Florida have some diversity in political leadership, as well as bringing parity to the individuals in Florida, which I think is terrific.
And we talked a lot about just women in representation. That would really actually apply to women of all parties in representation, some of the things that we went over. So yes.
Absolutely.
If you didn't check that one out.
Yes. Can
we get started?
Who do we have today?
So we have Dr. Zoe Ross-Nash, and she is a clinical psychologist, and one of her specialties is eating disorders. She's a certified eating disorder specialist. Her doctorate is from Nova Southeastern, and she also attended the University of California, Davis. She was an assistant professor of psychology doctoral programs, and she also does she does in-person and remote counseling and treatment. She is focused on trauma as well as eating disorders. And I apologize, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm having just a little technical difficulty, which is why I had to stop here, but I think we're good to go now. She's originally from New Jersey, now lives in both Illinois, is moving to the Washington, D.C. area. And I have heard her speak about eating disorders and about why this is or isn't a women's issue. And I thought she would bring just so much to our conversation, because it is something that we want to get out of the shadows and get out there. Yeah, so let's bring on Zoe. Hi, Zoe.
Hi, it's nice to see everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
How are you guys surviving in the Florida cold?
We are surviving the Florida cold. You're surviving the Illinois cold. And I hope I could mention that you were moving to the Washington, D.C. area. I just mentioned a little bit about you, correct?
I am. Yeah. We move in a couple of months. My husband gets restationed, so.
Nice. Well, we would love to talk about you, but we want to dive into our topic. So you're the perfect person, I think. I just would love to kind of set some framework. I think there's a lot of gender issues here and so many socialization issues, but I want to really just get clear on what we're talking about when we say eating disorders. You and I talked about disordered eating, but there's also clinical eating disorders. Could you sort of give us some definitions to think about that first?
Absolutely. So with all mental health, it exists on a spectrum. And what I like to tell people when they're first learning about eating disorders is we go from normal, intuitive eating. We eat when we're hungry, we don't when we're not. We can eat food where we're celebrating, we can eat food as a way to nourish our body, and we're not really second guessing our intake. Then we move towards dieting, which is when we are limiting our intake, whether it's the time that we're eating, how much we're eating, or the quality of food that we're eating. And then this is where it gets a little bit difficult to slice through, where we have something called disordered eating, where maybe we are having issues with our eating, we're having issues with our relationship with our body, but it's not impacting us on a day-to-day level, but it's still something that really is on our mind a lot. Then we move into something called an eating disorder, a clinically significant eating disorder. So that is when our relationship with food and body is interrupting our relationships, interrupting our work, interrupting our ability to just engage in activities of daily living. And uh, while these differentiations are very important, what's even more important is for people to know that you can get support and care at any level of concern.
Let me say first, thank you so much for that spectrum because I just as kind of, reading about it, thinking, talking to friends anecdotally of like, how do I separate out these things? So I think thinking about that spectrum and thinking about, as I like to say, how much time it occupies in the brain, I think is just so really helpful. And I know you have some numbers for us about how much is affected, but there's also issues of like, how do we diagnose that? How do we really know how many people have these kind of eating, I guess I'd say issues? How do we think about that and the demographics of the problem?
Yeah, so about 9% of the United States experiences an eating disorder, and that's actually a very large number compared to other sorts of mental health concerns. So I put it up in the same category as like anxiety and depression in terms of frequency. But with actually getting diagnosed with an eating disorder, the criteria is rather strict. So we use something called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, the DSM. There's 5 iterations of it. They actually just came out with a new one, DSM-5-TR. And fortunately, each iteration of the DSM has become more inclusive in its approach to diagnosing people with eating disorders. But because of the old stigmas associated with the DSM, an example of that could be you have to experience amenorrhea, which is a loss of menstruation. Well, what happens when we have a requirement of amenorrhea? Well, then anyone born as male wouldn't be able to be diagnosed with an eating disorder.
What about postmenopausal women, for heaven's sakes? I
Right.
mean, older women or something, yes.
Which is such an important community that is so under discussed and researched within the eating
Yeah.
disorder world. Just because of these stigmas, who do you think of when you think of an eating disorder? White, cisgender, thin, young
Right. Some
woman.
sort of teenage young woman. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas
Okay.
so many people are not getting diagnosed, they're not recognizing their concerns. So these numbers are honestly, in my opinion, very low.
Oh,
So I have a little bit of a bias that I assume the DSM expands a category when there's a drug to treat it, and therefore they want to expand the category. Is that what's happening with eating disorders, or no?
It's not necessarily connected to medical interventions.
Okay. Okay.
wow. Bringing out the conspiracy theories early. I like it.
That's
Um,
true. But I accept her. I accept her explanation.
but Scott, before we go, I think it's interesting to think about when you have your mental picture of who's being impacted by eating disorders or who's suffering from, you do go to that, young white female. And when you look at representation through media or film or TV shows, those are the pictures you see. Those are the stories that are told. So, again, I'm just reiterating that how much our media and entertainment set the stage for what our expectations are, right?
And reflecting, right? If that's what we see, that's what we're going to experience. No, it's totally
Mhm.
true. So, but while we're on that, so can we talk a little bit? I imagine this is huge, but about the causes. So, why is it that some people are susceptible, develop whether it's severe eating or just more moderate, I guess as you would call it, and others don't? Talk to us about how we think about the causes.
Yeah, so we decide that based off of a person's conceptualization. It's the why, what, where, when, and how. And a lot of eating disorder therapists use the biological, technically it's called the biopsychosocial model, but I really like the idea that we're integrating spirituality just because a lot of food is so connected with our culture, with our sense of living. There's an existential quality within eating disorders, especially since like not eating is essentially going against our biological innate drive to survive. So when we're doing something against that, then we're damaging our psyche in terms of our spirituality as well. But there's that biological component. So there's actually research studies that say our brains are looking different. Psychological, these individuals are more predisposed to anxiety, depression, and other comorbid disorders. Social, as you said, we are normalized to live in a world that favors smaller bodies. So of course it's going to lend to restrictive type behaviors or
Smaller bodies for women, not necessarily smaller bodies for men.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And then when you look at the DSM criteria, what does that say? It's restrictive behaviors. So the DSM also just very poorly captures the male experience for eating disorders.
So I want to come back to causes again, but I found it interesting. I just thought when you talked about spirituality about how much in every religion periods of ritual fasting is such a thing, so tied up with that, right?
Yeah.
Fasting makes you purer, more holy. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. I don't ascribe to those, but that's probably every religion that I know.
Every religion. Yeah, we have Ramadan, we have um, oh gosh, I should know this. I kind of went to church for a little bit.
Well, no, Catholics definitely have
Yeah,
periods.
Catholics do it.
Jews do, Muslims do. So there's three big religions right there. Hindus do have periods. So yeah, for sure. Okay.
Every religion. And it's also what makes eating disorders very complicated when you intersect it with faith.
Interesting. So what about the idea that it's kicked off by trauma of some sort? I mean, this is what I hear or read popularly, that people experience some sort of early trauma and that's a trigger. Is that true?
I'm a trauma therapist, so that is what I see in my practice. Uh,
Right.
I truly work at that intersectional lens of seeing it through a lot of individuals' trauma. 90% of the world experiences trauma. So, most likely, if a person comes in with an eating disorder, a person's coming in with a history of trauma. And actually, individuals with comorbid eating disorders have higher rates of PTSD. And that's important to know because, as I said, 90% of the world experiences trauma, only 8% experiences PTSD, where that number is significantly higher in the eating disorder communities.
Oh, that's
Okay, so let me think about
interesting.
this. 90% experiences some sort of what we call trauma. So growing up, etc., we're exposed to all this stuff, but obviously the vast majority of people do not then develop PTSD or some sort of eating disorder.
Correct.
Okay, so
Well,
do we know why some do?
I know in a relatively small percentage, like
Yeah, yeah.
8% seem, it's still a lot of people, but yeah, I would go with you, Scott. Do we know why?
My opinion and congruent with my training is resiliency factors and risk factors. So if you are given the skills to recover, that is just disseminated by your parents, your upbringing, if you're talking about these things, then you are more likely to identify it when it's happening, seek support when it is, and find recovery faster if that is something that you find in your life.
So now I'm just going to reflect back of what I think is out there in common cultural thinking. So would that then be true that if a woman has a mother who is diet obsessed, talks about weight, criticizes the daughter, that she's more likely to, but get based upon that kind of thing? That I mean, she obviously, I don't want to say the mother causes it, but that's part of the environmental factors. Is that right?
That is a huge part. This statistic might be a little bit old, but about 12%, or you are 12 times more likely to have bulimia if your mom had bulimia. So
Ooh, that's
that,
huge.
that's a
Wow.
big number.
That's
So
huge.
if you are modeling these behaviors of your parents, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, interesting.
Well, and I think about, and Scott, we talked about this a little on the prep use of your eating as control too. Like if you were feeling out of control in your family situation or relationship, whatever that looks like, of here's something I can control completely is my body.
Yeah, a lot of so my dissertation was the function of disordered eating after a traumatic experience, and control is a huge factor of that. So when something happens that is so far out of your control, well, what is something I can control? What I put into my body, what I look like. So it makes so much sense. Food is just a metaphor. It is a representation for what words cannot describe, and maybe a way to communicate when you're not able to use words to share what you're feeling if you're not ready to disclose it yet. Our bodies can do it for
Hmm,
us.
interesting.
Mhm.
And I'm obviously not an eating disorder specialist, but I study gender. And the feminist theory would be because women have so many fewer degrees of control in their wider world. The vast majority of women are not socialized to feel those same levers of control as your average male. in this country that therefore we're much more likely to take it out on our bodies. I mean, so would go the feminist theories about our, the rest of our lives.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I heard someone say once that shame is anger turned inward, and a
Yeah,
lot of women
yeah,
experience shame much more frequently than men,
yeah.
and a lot of women experience shame about their body. Maybe we're just angry at our bodies because we have no agency over it.
Or we don't have agency in the feminist theory would say we don't have agency in other aspects of our lives. So
Mhm.
we damn well are going to have agency in this thing that we can because our agency is blocked, limited, however you want to call it in other areas.
And we're societally valued for it.
Yes, thank you. Can we talk about that then? Let's go into that. I mean, women are still overwhelmingly socialized to value appearance above all else. I mean, that
Mhm.
has to factor into it, I feel.
Of course, it's ingrained in our value system.
Well, and not only, and I always like to throw the curveball, Zoe, of when you look at not only the importance of appearance, but the fear of backlash. And when you look at social media, which can be so mean, and if a woman who's overweight makes a statement of a position, the vitriol that gets posted about, well, looks like the only thing that you need to give an opinion on is where to go to the gym or quit eating pizza or blah, blah, blah. So just that attack on appearance for women versus men in the public forum and certainly in the social media space is so you understand why some women don't want to speak out because they're afraid of the only backlash I'm going to get is you picking apart my appearance of, whatever that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the flip side, then people are told they're brave, and it's like I'm not brave. I'm just existing in my body. Like, does it have to be this big statement for me to just look the way I do?
Mm-hmm.
So there it feels like there's no winning, especially for women who live in larger bodies, and they're scrutinized for just existing.
So, but I guess I can't help but think also, and this is not to criticize this per se, but there's something here about women who capitalize and profit off of diet culture. And I'm sorry, I'm thinking of someone like Oprah Winfrey, which I realize she has many different platforms and speaks out and supports many things. But one of them, certainly, that she's very closely identified with is her issues around her body and weight, etc. I mean, we are sure as hell marketing that one. I mean, it's her
Mm-hmm.
prerogative, but I just find that fascinating, should I say?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So, let's talk about cosmetic changes and cosmetic surgery. How do you see that fitting in? I mean, I get it's not totally new, but the widespread use of it seems to be.
I completely agree. And it's just more accessible nowadays. You see med spas everywhere, and you can get body modifications where you don't even have to go under a surgical knife. So we have filler, we have Botox, we have all of these different surgeries essentially or procedures that can help you look that certain appearance, whereas it wasn't always accessible to people. And I know a lot of individuals who are maybe going into debt to maintain their appearance because these things are expensive. And we I think earlier we spoke about well, Scott and I spoke about the amount of money that women spend on their appearance in their lifetime. I think you could buy a whole doctorate with the amount of money that you spend. And we are putting so much of our resources, our emotional resources, our financial resources into the way that we look. And not that that's a bad thing, but what else could we be spending our money on to invest in ourselves in this different way?
Yeah, the opportunity cost is one. I'm sorry, Ashley. You
No,
want
no, no. I was just gonna say, and I feel like, and I know that men have the same opportunities to worry about appearance and all of those things, but it just really feels very not equal on the scale of the just the focus that's put on appearance for women in our field to need, like I do need Botox or I do need fillers because God forbid I'm aging.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, women are socialized so that that's our number one calling card. I mean, that is basically, and yes, we have other attributes, but it still is the overwhelmingly the message. Um, Athletics.
Mhm.
I always had this notion or let me put it this way, I've seen since Title IX with the growth of women's athletics, especially for high school girls, etc., so many women embracing a level of physicality and acceptance of their bodies, more muscular bodies, gym culture. I personally think a lot of that is great, though I do know in some sports, maybe gymnastics, ballet, things like that, it can be unhealthy. So talk to us about how we might see that.
The frustrating thing is that it can be unhealthy in so many different domains. If you're not having a flexible, comfortable relationship with exercise and food, even though you might look muscular and you're hitting your nutritional needs, you can still have an unhealthy relationship with food if you're so rigid in your approach and you can't be flexible towards what you're eating. So within athletics, we see a lot of athletes getting injured, even though they're eating quote unquote healthy, but because their body is under so much stress, they're putting so much physical strain on it, and it's it actually causes people to step backwards in their career, propelling them forward.
I know there's a lot of studies about female runners, which I've looked at, who really have had this issue that they needed, in fact, more calories, but there was this push to stay. I mean, maybe something was just poor science that they had to be lighter, but for women especially, it really, it was a big problem. I remember reading about that.
If your athletes are getting a lot of bone fractures, it's probably because they're in some sort of osteopenia or some sort of issue that's causing their bones to be fragile.
I don't know where we are on time, Ashley. Do you know where we are on time?
I do. We've got a little right at 5 minutes, and I
Okay,
think two
good.
of the things, the GLP,
Yeah.
and then, you touched on a little bit with Oprah, but there's other, you know, big names that have the body positivity, and I'd love to
Celebrities.
have that conversation too. But the GLP culture and being able to everyone, it feels like, is doing Ozempic or a trizepatide or, fill in the blank, even very thin people, right?
Yeah. It's it's a very nuanced topic. So first and foremost, my concern about it is it's taking away access to adequate intervention for individuals who genuinely need this. It's a medicine for diabetes, and it's being capitalized on by the weight loss culture. That being said, I have seen clients finally feel freedom from the food noise that they were experiencing when they were on a GLP-1. And then on the other side, I have seen individuals relapse with their eating disorder because they started engaging in a GLP-1 and had these terrible medical side effects as a consequence of it. My big concern is they're relatively new interventions and we don't know the long-term side effects of it. So I don't want to demonize anything, but I also do see there's a lot of danger associated with it.
I mean, I think the relapse, and I agree with you, it's so new. It's sort of like, why are we on this bandwagon? But in any event, I understand why people do. But if it's true that the relapse rate is very high, at least that's what I've read, and that would seem to be makes sense if it's true because of other diets, isn't the relapse rate quite high? So if people are talking about being on it for life, talk about unknown consequences just from a medical perspective.
Yeah, it's there could be so many things that happen, and a lot of times not only could you have side effects from the GLP-1, but then you're also going to get side effects from malnutrition because if your GLP-1 is causing you to be so nauseous all the time you can't eat, well, that's going to cause a lot of issues from that alone.
Right. Others, yeah. Is
And who wants to be nauseous all the time? Just note to self, like, what
that
is,
really what it does? Causes nausea?
yeah.
Yeah, nausea. I've heard of like Ozempic face, Ozempic finger. Like there's a lot of consequences, and it's interesting. The drive for thinness supersedes any other sort of physical attraction I think that people look for. Because we say that there's Ozempic face and their face gets like hollow looking.
Mm.
Well, being thin is more important than looking like you have a lively face, essentially, is what we're communicating.
I
Well,
wish we had more time to talk about older women. I think we're going to need like a part two on this because I think that's such an interesting topic because I know so many women. I know women my age whose mothers are in their 80s or 90s and still they're talking about, right? It's just, and it's like, whoa, that is so deep. I mean, I feel sorry. I don't know how to say it. That is so deeply ingrained in their brain, the opportunity cost of not being able to focus on other things. It feels sad.
yeah.
That's really does.
Well, and one, quick thing is, before we wrap up, because I think we talk about the body positivity of Lizzo is one that, Scott, you had on our notes,
I had a
which
thought. Yes.
there's been a big conversation about that, and then finding that balance between thin is not always healthy and being overweight is not always unhealthy. Like it's such an individual thing for the person. And I think we gloss over that a lot.
That's a fantastic point.
Yeah. Which I think that just making that, I don't know, normalizing the conversation about it, that it's really about your individual journey. And so much of it is psychological and how we feel, how we see ourselves, how we were treated by parents or siblings or friends or school, like all of those things go into it. It's such a complex topic.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
but now I just want to say one thing because then we should give Zoe a chance to wrap it up. I think it is, but I mean, I know, and I talk to women about all kinds of things. I'm very open, and I could practically count on one hand the number of times that any woman has said to me, I really struggle with my eating. And I guarantee you, so many women do. We know it, whether it's disordered eating or more severe. I just know it's
Mhm.
true. And you scratch the surface. But how many women, they'll tell you about everything else, but would say, I think about food. I just struggle with it. I mean, it never happens. I mean, I'm totally anecdotal, but I mean, Ashley, do people don't? They won't say. They might express other
Yeah.
vulnerabilities, but I almost never hear that.
Well, and it's the same thing with weight, like saying how much you weigh. Like that's like why would you ever even say that? Or
Oh,
this
if
is
somebody asks about
appropriate,
their weight,
right?
right? It's
No.
like,
Okay.
I'm sorry, Zoe, tell us. So how should we leave it? How should we help people think about this before we leave?
That's so what you're talking about is that we've almost normalized these pathological behaviors in our everyday society that we don't even know when it's an issue versus when it's just something that's happening with everyone. So if it's happening with everyone, I don't need to get help for it. And that is just not the case. If you are having concerns about your body weight, shape, and size, get support. And we don't say, "Oh, I'm having issues with my body," because everyone is. I think at some point we've all had some sort of insecurity about our body, and it's a taboo topic to discuss. So if we can just have conversations around it, if we can be honest about our experiences, I think more and more people would be able to identify the concerns in themselves and then get the help that they need.
They would show that vulnerability. Thank you.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna put this in the show notes. I think it's still in print. It's for anybody who's a parent who wants to be a parent. The best book I ever found in Zoe. I don't know if you have any others, if this is your area, but for raising children, because so much starts young, is called How to Get Your Child to Eat But Not Too Much. I've looked it up. It's just, I mean, I've raised two kids. I remember finding it when they were little and thinking, this person is onto something. It was phenomenal. Just, I'm gonna put it in the show notes.
Nice.
Sounds like a great book.
Excellent. Well,
Zoe,
thank
we can't
you.
thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you for
And so
joining.
many other ways that we could go. As you can tell, this is an interesting topic, and I am so glad that you are so willing to talk about it and have so much knowledge and can bring so much to the table because I think it's super valuable.
Thank you for having me and having this platform.
Absolutely. And then before we say goodbye, I'm sure we'll put in the show notes, there's resources and I'm sure numbers that can be called if anyone is dealing with this or thinks they are. So that would be an encouragement of to reach out and get that help.
Yes, absolutely. Get help. The National Eating Disorders Association is a fantastic resource to start.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank,
you so much. Have
thank
a
you,
wonderful day.
Zoe.
Stay warm.